Newly emerging diseases in a world out of balance. Thanks to both of you for being here. Laurie, you and I were both on TV late last night talking about the latest information. There is new latest information, and some of it is about the potential spread of this thing. But I think the most important piece is the World Health Organization has basically come out and said in a scold to some governments around the world, you're not doing your job, so we're going to help you with it. But you owe it to your people to be transparent and honest about what's going on.
Yes, the WHO, I think, is getting incredibly frustrated with the lack of government responses until it's too late.
Right.
Country after country, governments don't mobilize until it's already widespread.
Or deny the importance of this.
Or deny the importance. And then the second piece of it is just today, for the first time, they seem to be making a big switch from trying to plead to governments to speaking directly to you and I and saying, here's how you can protect yourself. Don't wait for your government. And if you go to the WHO website right now, you can see what steps you can do to protect your children, to protect yourself, to protect your workplace, how far we need to be from one another, when you should and should not wear masks. It's all out there now.
And this is really important because there's a lot of garbage on the internet about how you're supposed to protect yourself from this, including drinking bleach, which is not true.
Ignore
so the
all
idea
of it.
that the World Health Organization has got it. Jacob Ward, in the absence of strong government policy, transparency, advice, and in our case, in the United States, a government that is suggesting this is both a Democratic hoax and a media attempt to undermine Donald Trump. In the absence of all that, 60-some% of Americans work every day, most of them outside of the home. Companies, employers, workers have got to start thinking about their behavior in the face of a potentially spreading infection. What's your thinking on how this is working out? Because we don't have a lot of experience with this.
No, that's exactly right. You know, as a country, Ali, we have almost no experience, right, with figuring out how are we going to actually limit our contact with one another? How are we going to somehow, you know, shut down the spread of a virus across the population? You know, we spent the week here in California sorting out these new cases, one now in Santa Clara, one coming out of Solano County, and you know, parked outside that hospital, you know, with the female patient inside. I was speaking to top health officials here in the state who were saying, you know, one of the first questions I asked them was, are we overhyping this? You know, as journalists, should we be worried about hyping it? And they said, we are not worried about media hype. We want you to hype it because it is really a problem. You know, this one person told me we expect a lot of infections and a lot of deaths. Okay, so now you look across our society and you think, well, wait a minute, what kind of system do we have for that? I mean, if you shut down a store unexpectedly in the middle of a workday, people are up in arms, right? The United States is not a country that is used to shutting things down. I mean, if you go and look at how China dealt with the original source of transmission, right, the Wuhan city, that city is like shutting down Chicago. They shut down highways. They shut down everything, right? We don't do that here in this country. And instead, we're dependent, as you pointed out here, on companies to make the right decisions. We saw Facebook cancel its big F8 conference. We're seeing companies pull out of the big game developers conference that's supposed to happen here in the Bay Area. But that's what we depend on, is companies as this sort of disaggregated set of institutions to make good decisions with the best possible information. And as you guys are pointing out there, right, we're not getting great information right now. So how are those companies going to keep the rest of us safe? And really, I think the fundamental question, Ali, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, are companies really supposed to be the front line on this stuff? You know, should we be living in a society where there's a little more top-down control? I'm not sure I want to live in that society.
It's a good question. But what I'd love to hear is that, right? Whether or not we should be in that society or not, Laurie, I would love to hear the president or the person in charge, the vice president of this, giving me real information rather than, and I just want to remind people, Mike Pence is the guy who said smoking doesn't kill you. He's the guy who said needle exchanges don't prevent the spread of infection. Rush Limbaugh and Trump are out there saying, and it is a fact, more people die of the flu than we have seen die of coronavirus, in a way that is meant to diminish the importance with which you should treat this. Give me a sense of this, because you think about this and study this and talk to people about it all the time. Well, how do I think about coronavirus differently than the flu?
Well, it's far more infectious than the flu, and it's far more deadly than the flu, and it is like trying to keep from getting a cold. The best way to think about the infectiousness of it is about half of all common colds are from the same family of viruses, coronaviruses. And if you think about how hard it is to not get a cold when your child comes home sneezing from school, or when you go to the office and somebody you work with has the cold, then you realize just how contagious it is. And it's contagious by more means. It's your contact, it's your hands, it's not washing your hands enough, it's sneezing, it's coughing, it's airborne, it's all of the above. And this makes for a very great difficulty in controlling. But I want to say something I think is really crucial to understand, that's leading, I think, to a misconception in this country about how much we actually have. You showed the number 64. Right. 64 cases, supposedly. People in this country need to understand we haven't done any testing. Right. So we don't really know. We don't know how many people in California, in Oregon, in Washington
so 64 people had some reason to be tested. In other words, some doctor, whether they arrived at Travis Air Force Base or somewhere else, had a reason to do it. And I think, Jake, you were saying at the hospital in California, they had to check in with CDC before testing?
This is the number one problem that California health officials feel, is that they do not have on-site testing. So if you are a hospital right now who has a patient coming in here in California who's presenting symptoms that you can't explain, you then have to go to the CDC and ask for them to do the testing. And the CDC has been abiding by a really strict criteria. Did that person travel?
Well, the CDC can't do the test either. Jake, I mean, this is the problem.
And the CDCs don't have the capacity either.
The test failed. The test isn't working. It has to be completely rethought, remade. And now the problem is you have jurisdiction after jurisdiction around the country saying, FDA, loosen your rules. Let us develop our own tests. We can do it faster. We have the technology in place. We have the scientists in place. Let us do our testing. In the entire United States, we've only tested about 450 people. That's it. And you look across the world, and all sorts of countries are way ahead of us, with tens of thousands of people having been tested, even up to 1 million people being tested. We have no idea how pervasive this virus is in America, and anybody who's telling you otherwise is full of crap.
Jake, Health and Human Services Secretary Azar says that by next week, maybe by Monday, some of this will be solved by virtue of the fact that they're going to let people come up, replicate the recipe for the test.
Right, right. That's the hope, right? But when we've looked at the systems that you need in order to do these tests, right, you need typically a system. It's not a simple, slip you apply to the skin or a swab, right? It is a much more complex system. Not every hospital has that system. The investment that will be required is huge. And then once you do test those people, and if we do find out that there are in fact huge numbers of people who have it in the community, remember, there's no treatment. There's no vaccine. You can put them into, you can put them on antibiotics for a secondary infection. You can do other things, but there is no treatment for this. And very quickly, if you need people on respirators and the rest of it, we're going to run out of capacity fast. So this gets back to this question that you're asking here, Ali, is, how will we as a society cope if there really is a pandemic here? And for me, the wonderful thing about an open society, right, is our ability to move back and forth, capital flows, ideas flow. It's a great thing. But in a system like this, where suddenly you're worried about the transmission of a thing from person to person, suddenly that's a real liability.
Right, everything that's our strength becomes our vulnerability in this sort of thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right. Well, I think a very complicated situation.
We're going to leave it there, but thank you to both of you for a robust and important conversation on this. And I think the message from this is that it's not overhyped. This is a serious matter. Jacob Ward in California for us this morning. Thanks for getting up early for us. Laurie Garrett, who was here with me late last night and again this morning. She's a health policy analyst, and she's the author of The Coming Plague, Newly Emerging Diseases in a World Out of